So I am delighted to welcome my guest. We have Kate Binnie, yoga teacher, and also in the final year of your PhD. Welcome, Kate. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, so I'm in the final year of my PhD, which is a funded PhD through UKRI, UK Research and Innovation. And I was very lucky to get the funding to do this. And I'm based at the Hull York Medical School, so it's a PhD in medical sciences in the Wolfson Centre for Palliative Care Research. So I'm specifically in a palliative care unit. So all of my colleagues and all of the funding that we have is for research in palliative care. But because it's a medical school, everyone else is doing things like, opioids and, things like, palliative care in India. So it's an international group. I'm the only person doing this kind of non-pharmacological complementary health kind of research. So I'm very much, a bit of an outlier.
That is fascinating. And I guess we can look at that as a real positive step.
Mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been very, very interesting, and we can unpick that. But it's taught me a lot about some of the opportunities, but also some of the biases against things like yoga, and how we can work with that. So part of the training that I deliver for Yoga Campus is thinking about how we can use yoga within these medical environments, and not scare the funders, the medics, the people who don't know what yoga is, or they think it's standing on your head in a leotard. So it's something about using the right language for your audience.
Brilliant. And we'll unpick that a little bit. So that's a perfect segue because you run a very, very successful and popular course, Mindful Yoga in Supportive and Palliative Care and into Bereavement. It's coming up on the 8th and the 9th of February. So if you're listening, we're in 2025. Let's kick off with that. This is a course I've had my eye on for ages. It always seems to land on my son's birthday. But let's just talk about that course. And I guess I'd love to know more about the PhD. So is this an area that you've always worked in?
Yeah, so prior to training as a yoga teacher, which I did at Yoga Campus, and I qualified in 2010. That's when I did my first yoga teacher training. Prior to that, I've been practicing yoga kind of all my life because my dad used to do yoga, and he was my first teacher. I qualified as a music therapist, so I actually came to all of my work really through being a singer, and so I trained as a singer, and then I became a music therapist, and so that's postgraduate training, music psychotherapy, and I worked in a variety of settings, neuro rehab, some dementia work, mental health, and then I finally got a job in a hospice near Oxford where I live. And it was sort of a revelation. So people kind of fall in love with palliative care. They either think that's not for me, or they fall in love with it. And I fell in love with it. And as a music therapist, I was working with music, with song, with instruments, with creative songwriting, and there's all sorts of techniques. That's like a separate course. So I do training in music therapy for another organization. But what I found was that my own personal yoga practice was extremely helpful to manage my own distress around some of the situations I encountered at work. But also, I found that instinctively I was drawing on some yoga techniques with my patients. So if I was called to see somebody who was in high distress, or working with somebody who was really stuck, I struggled to know what to do with the training I'd been given in my music therapy, but I had the embodied skills from my own yoga practice to use with those patients to help them to basically be calmer, be more relaxed. If I found that if I was more present in my own body, then that was catching. So we now know about mirror neurons and how that works. And so I started to consciously bring techniques from my yoga practice. I also did a mindfulness training around that time at the Oxford Mindfulness Centre. And I basically started to bring everything together. And this is how the work began, because it was so effective that my medical colleagues were asking me, what are you doing? Because it's really working. What are you doing with these patients? And so I said, well, why don't I share some of this with you? So I started to train my colleagues just to use some simple breathing techniques, grounding techniques, simple body postural things. And some of the thinking around, why yoga works and why these techniques could be so helpful. And then it sort of took off from there. And I applied to do a master's at King's College London, which is where they have the Cicely Saunders Institute, which is the kind of mothership of the palliative care movement. And I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to do a master's there. And I did a project, my master's project was yoga for pain in advanced cancer. And again, I was in a medical setting, and I was the only person who was interested in this stuff. Anyway, so that's how it all started. It started clinically in a hospice, working with patients and seeing that all this tension, all this suffering, that was not amenable to the interventions of the medical model, could be amenable to some of the kind of deep interpersonal skills that we practice in yoga. They're deep interpersonal skills. It's not just about me and my body and my nervous system. It's about working with others, and that's really what this work is about.
That is so incredible. What a great story. I love hearing how people sort of arrive into the areas that they're working in, and you've had so much success, and it's incredible that you've now got the funding for this PhD. When we think back to that first exploration and when your colleagues were saying, "What are you doing?" I loved that, by the way. "What are you doing? Can you share your magic?" Has it changed? Has the landscape changed now? Are we seeing that shift in the right direction for that acceptance of yoga?
Yes, I mean, very much. And I think the time is now. So I think the pandemic was very helpful to our cause, because a lot of people who didn't do this sort of thing before the pandemic now do. So as part of my PhD research, I've interviewed 50 people, largely healthcare professionals. So about 40 healthcare professionals, about 10 patients, because a lot of my stakeholders in the research are patients. But anyway, and what I found was that a lot of people were driven by their own distress and by the fact that they were kind of stuck in the house with a computer to start exploring online yoga, online mindfulness, started using the apps. And so particularly the people kind of under 40, I would say, healthcare professionals are much more open to the language of mindfulness, to breath work. It's very kind of popular now. I think yoga still is a bit of a difficult word, and I tend to not use the word yoga in my work. I mean, it slips out, but I think that often patients themselves are really freaked out if you say we're going to do some yoga, because they're sitting there on their last legs, they're very ill. So, I've learned to sort of try and describe things in a very simple way, and talk about mechanisms rather than an outcomes. Okay, so this is going to help you to feel more relaxed. This is going to work through nervous system regulation. This is going to help you to feel more at peace in your body, and therefore your symptoms will be less intense. And so, so I've forgotten the original question, but I hope
No,
that
that's,
answered
I
it.
mean, there's so much to unpack in there. And I have read, been reading up before our chat today, you did an interview with Yoga Campus a good few years ago, and you talked about that sort of that pushback on the term. And I guess it's like with everything in life, when you have a preconceived idea about something, like we'd said before we hit record, yoga, headstand, standing on your head in a leotard and having to be flexible. How you described then the way you talk to a patient, it makes total sense. This is how you will feel. Putting them at ease is so important. And I loved in the previous Yoga Campus article that you did, there was a quote where you said you see patients turn towards their fear and pain, towards their fear and pain soften and feel it subside. It got me really
Yeah.
emotional, because I thought it is so powerful, isn't it? When they're at the, a stage of their life when there's must be so much going on mentally, emotionally, physically, that it's powerful that you have these tools at your disposal to help them.
Yeah. And one of the things I do on the course is to really unpick that, because literally while we were getting organised this morning, I'm giving a lecture at King's next week. There will be it's medical audience, but I'm explaining the course is called Creative and Complementary Therapies. It's just a big overview of all the different things. So I'm talking about, my headphone fell out. I'm talking about I am talking about yoga, I'm talking about mindfulness, breath work, talk about massage therapy, talk about music therapy, art therapy. So kind of big overview. But one of the things I think is that it's so interesting because in the medical model, if you can't show direct causation between, input, output, then it's considered to be irrelevant. There is no evidence base. So this is a real problem. This is a real problem for us, people like us. And so in my research, I've tried to come at things differently, show how complex causation is. And so one of the things we unpack in the course is that. So how is it that you can go into a room with somebody who's really distressed and do something that I'm going to call yoga for the sake of simplicity, but it's a very pared down kind of yoga. I always say that yoga is an inside job. So we're not talking about fancy asana, we're talking about some of the basic core principles here. How is it that actually can soothe and alleviate someone's physical, psychological, spiritual, and social suffering? And it is complex because human beings are complex, and it is about tuning into somebody and to their subjective world. So that's something that we go into quite deeply on the course, because I think that people need to be able to understand that. So if you're a yoga practitioner and you want to go and work in your local hospice, and lots of people that I have trained in the past are now working in their local hospices, and I interviewed some of them for my research, which has been really fascinating. So people are doing this work out in the world, and there is funding. It's not easy to come by, but we know that things are going to shift quite quickly now, because palliative care is really high on the agenda now in the new government, and with the assisted dying bill and stuff, and we'll probably unpack that as well on the course. But you need to be able to sell your product. You need to be able to explain what you're doing and why you're doing it and how it works and what the outcomes are. And so that's something that I try and help people to come away with as a result of doing this training. So how are you going to, go and talk to your local provider and try and persuade them to fund you to do this work?
That's brilliant. And you said right at the beginning, when we started talking, when you first went into palliative care, it tends to be you either love it or you don't. You're sort of drawn to it. To anyone listening that's thinking, wow, this course, I'd love to do something like this, but I'm not sure if this is an area I'd want to work in, what would you say to them?
I think most people who are drawn to this kind of work have had some sort of experience with death and dying. So I think it's kind of unlikely that if I applied to do the work in palliative care because I'd had my own experiences. I remember looking after my grandmother and I wasn't frightened, do you know what I mean? Like, I think some people can't really handle people who are demented or dying. And I just sort of knew that I was going to be okay with it. Often people who come to do this work have had some sort of personal brush with death. So they may have experienced that, a loved one dying, and perhaps they've been often people are driven by the fact that they have seen bad care, unfortunately, and they want to make things better. They want to deliver something holistic for people. I think if you're interested, you can always go and volunteer at your local hospice. I mean, yeah, it's funny. People always think it's kind of really ghastly and miserable, and it isn't, working with the dying, because I mean, I have seen some pretty upsetting things, but that was my role more as a music therapist, where I did spend a lot of time on the ward. So I was with people who were kind of really very, very unwell and sort of imminently dying. It's very unlikely as a yoga teacher that you are going to be exposed to that, because you'll predominantly be working in what they call day services or well-being services, which are where people come from the community into the hospice. Some people I know do actually go out into the community, so they'll be working as a community yoga teacher. Those tend to be people who have multiple trainings, so they may also be a nurse or a physio. So quite a lot of people who come to this course in the past have been dual trained. So you'll find, so for example, so this course is not just for yoga teachers. It's for people, for example, as I said, who are a nurse or a doctor or a physio or an occupational therapist or a speech and language therapist, anything. They want some extra skills. So they're already in the environment and they're not scared of it. But if you're totally new to it, I think it's just, maybe reading some books. There's a very good reading list that goes with this course. And thinking, do I want to be around people who are, so if you're so one of the yoga teachers I interviewed said, it's really weird because you get to know Marjorie. She's coming every week to your group. And then Marjorie doesn't come anymore. And you go to the person who's running the day service and say, where's Marjorie? And they'll say, oh, she died, or she's too sick to come, and the next week she's died. And I think there's very little support for people like yoga teachers, because they're not seen generally in that context as sort of core members of the MDT, the multidisciplinary team. You might not get the support that perhaps other staff get. I used to find that hard when patients died, but you know that you've done something really good with them, and you've really helped them during that time you've been with them. And I've always found the benefits of that really outweigh the sadness. And it makes you, I mean, the fact is, we're all, yoga's very clear on this, we are all dying, and we are all going to die, and avoidance of that is one of the causes of our suffering, according to the kleshas. So, and we cover that a bit in the module as well. So I found yoga really helpful as a way of just, philosophically, it's very well aligned with the philosophy of palliative care. And I think that's really, really interesting and really helpful. And so when I have run groups in hospices with people who've never done yoga before, if I have brought in some of the philosophy of yoga, it's been really well received. It's really opened up conversations about death and dying, which have been really helpful for people, because people are very death avoidant in our society.
Yeah, I think that's a great soundbite, actually, the death avoidant. And I think you just summed it up so beautifully, that it, that maybe the philosophy, or the fact that it's been well received, it's really interesting. It's an area that really fascinates me, and something I wanted to pick up on. I read a stat in the European Association for Palliative Care that an estimated 4.4 million people in the World Health Organization, and growing, including children, need palliative care. And you'd mentioned, when we talked a little bit about your PhD, how this is going to get bigger. Does this mean, for anyone thinking of maybe joining the course, is this an indication that this is an area there where they should, if they've got the interest, like I have, that it's a growing area or a developing area?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing of palliative care is going to shift, because it's really underfunded. So since I started, funding has been cut. So it's really difficult to make a living as a palliative care therapist, as a music therapist, or a yoga therapist, or anything. I've got one of those portfolio careers, which is lots of different things, which is, I recommend. But I think things are shifting, and I think that, I mean, we have a more and more chronic disease. So more and more lifestyle related disease, more frailty. People are living longer. People are going into hospital because they are falling over, then they're frail. And I think one of the good selling points and the increased dementia, loads of dementia, it's the highest leading cause of death in women over 80. And so I think one of the selling points of yoga, and this is something I do cover in the course, is sort of, how do you align yourself? Do you see yourself as a sort of public health professional, in a sense, supporting older people with movement, confidence to move, confidence to walk, confidence to get up and down out of a chair, something that's aligned perhaps with physiotherapy, so thinking about it in that way. And I think what's so useful about it, and this is why so many physios actually come on the course, is it gives physios that extra, the philosophy of yoga, some of the more creative ways of doing movement. So just getting up and down out of a chair is one thing, but doing it in a yoga way, perhaps including some specific breath work, or some more creative movements or visualizations, even music, all of these things. Yoga can kind of give us that framework to develop the more physical, the more physical practices to cater to that population. But going back to your thing, I mean, palliative care is, I mean, everyone wants a good death for themselves and for loved ones. You don't just necessarily have a bad death if you don't receive palliative care, but certainly in my experience, palliative care professionals, whether they be anybody in, will have an understanding of the holistic needs of the person. So if you die without palliative care, you be treated as somebody with a heart problem or whatever it is. palliative care is about holism and about holistic care. And that's where the yoga bit piece slots in really nicely, because yoga, of course, is about holism. It's about breath, body, mind, and spirit. So if you find a team that understand that, and so it's very much, in my experience, about who is leading this team and who holds the purse strings, and do they get what yoga is beyond somebody in a leotard doing a headstand. If they get it, they will snap you up. And I think this is so, as I said, I was brilliantly surprised doing my research just how many yogis are out there working in palliative care. There's loads of them.
That's fantastic. Do you cover that in the course, sort of the
Yeah,
next steps at once? Oh, that's
yeah.
brilliant. So like
Mm.
once they've done the course, how they can move into the area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very much the difficulty, and I do cover this in the course, is that in the NHS, and hospices are often dual fund, so charity and NHS, professional, they will have healthcare professionals and allied health professionals who are registered with the Healthcare Professionals Council. This is one of the things that is really difficult for yoga teachers. And it's come up actually recently I read some articles about it. It was actually in The Guardian, about the fact that, kind of anyone can say I'm a yoga teacher, or anyone can say I'm a mindfulness teacher, or anyone can say they're a counsellor, pretty much. The registration isn't tight enough. So I do think that's a bit of a problem, and it can be difficult to to sort of justify your role and funding, because no, I'm not a registered nurse, I'm not a registered OT or whatever. So that's where I think a lot of people come who are already registered as something else, and this is like, so they're coming at it that the way. They're coming on the course because they want to add some holistic skills to their clinical training. But having said that, if you are a yoga teacher or yoga therapist and you are really interested in working in this area, so I do cover bereavement as well, then I think it's worth doing the course, simply because it gives you the confidence and the skills and the language and some materials to build on. And if you do find your local charity, hospice, whatever it could be, I talk about this on the course, it's not just hospices, there are other ways to deliver palliative care. So through other charity groups, Maggie's Cancer Centres, Age UK, Parkinson's UK. There's lots of charities out there who are delivering, you can work for. So I try and sort of, I would encourage people to do it, because as I said, I think things are changing. I think social care is another area we should be thinking about moving into, dementia care. So I think there are opportunities. I think you just have to understand that the landscape is it's a bit like the Wild West, a bit uncharted.
Yeah, exactly. But it's exciting, isn't it? That there are so many opportunities. I could talk to you all day, Kate. You are so interesting, and I love the portfolio career. I just think that's why you've got so much knowledge and you've had so much experience. So it's a no-brainer for the course. So how often do you run the course?
It's once a year.
Okay.
So I do run so this course I run at Yoga Campus. And I run a course in Oxford where I live at the hospital. So that's as part of the it's at the hospice in Oxford University Hospitals Trust. And that one it's slightly different, as in most people who come to that are healthcare professionals, but we have had therapists and yoga teachers on that. So in a sense, you can get me doing a training that is pretty similar twice a year. I do lots of other teaching, but it's at King, it's at universities. So yeah, and it's online, and you have access to the recording. So we record it, and so the way I teach is just how I teach, is I have slides, and everyone gets those slides. So that's the kind of book with a reading list. And we do lots of practice during the weekend, so people kind of get to experience some of the practices. And some discussion and reflection. So, I have to say, I always think when I've done this course, a weekend is not long enough. And it's almost like we need to do a weekend as an introduction, and then, you could do a 5-day course, no bother, because I think bereavement, I tacked it on because it's really important, but it could be a course all of its own, or the whole thing could be longer. So in a sense, I guess we'll see it as an introduction to teaching yoga and supportive palliative care and supporting people in bereavement, because bereavement starts before death.
Yeah, such a fascinating subject. We should do a whole
Mm,
other podcast chat on that because it affects everybody in so many
mm,
different ways as well.
And I mean, I don't, in the course, I don't cover, I have one slide on pediatric palliative care because it's not my field. It is, I mean, I wouldn't say that it's, I mean, of course, it's palliative care is palliative care. I think that will be a different thing.
Mhm,
My experience, and so I can only really teach from my experience and my research, is adults.
mhm,
But certainly, I actually think there's a lot of opportunity for yoga in pediatrics. It's just you've got to have my children are older now. My youngest is 17, but I've got three. But when they were younger, and I was asked to do yoga with pediatric palliative care patients, I didn't want to do it because I knew I just couldn't hack it. It's not my, I felt too
mm.
close. But I know there are people doing that. I think at Great Ormond Street they're doing that. So,
That's
you know,
incredible, isn't it?
mm,
So if you want to catch this course with Kate, it's coming up on 8th and 9th of February. So it's a Saturday and a Sunday. It's online. And as Kate said, full access. I think it's for 6 months, which is brilliant. And we'll make sure we spread your message far and wide. Good luck with the final year, Kate.
thank you. But what I would just say, and I would, if anyone's interested, but they're not sure whether they can hack it, or so this has happened to me before, is that people are going through perhaps a very intense bereavement, like right now. Or I had somebody come and her husband was dying of a brain tumor while she was doing the course. I always like to know first. So if you're interested but you're not sure, then you can get in touch with me through Yoga Campus. They'll forward your email on to me, because I think people should be prepared that we will be talking about death, we will be talking about dying, we will be talking about grief. And so we will be going there. This is not, do you know what I mean? We will be going there. And there are some pretty heartrending case studies that I use. When I say heartrending, they're just real. They're real stories of real people dying. And so I think people have to be prepared for that and not say, oh, it was upsetting. It might be upsetting, but it may also be really inspiring
Yeah, I think
and
so.
useful and
And
useful.
that's great. Yeah, so people can that's good to know that you'll chat to people
Oh,
beforehand. Thank you
definitely.
so
Yeah.
much for your time, Kate. I really
It's a pleasure.
appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's
We'll
a
see you
pleasure.
soon.
Thank you.